David Thompson, a magnate accustomed to dictating rules, freezes at the sight of his pregnant ex-wife working as a waitress. Yes, that's right. The past he tried so hard to forget is standing right in front of him, holding a tray and sporting a belly that leaves no room for doubt. David adjusts the collar of his shirt as he walks through the luxurious restaurant. Sophia, his girlfriend, smiles at him, oblivious to the whirlwind about to unfold. They choose a table near the window, where the soft candlelight dances over expensive porcelain. Everything seems perfect until David looks up and sees Rachel. There she is, dressed in the simple uniform of the waitresses, balancing expensive plates on a tray. Her hair is pulled back into a tight bun, and her eyes avoid any contact with his table. Rachel moves with precision between the tables, but her face betrays a mix of pain and determination. David feels the air leave his lungs for a moment. What is she doing here? He mutters softly, almost to himself. Sophia notices the sudden change in his demeanor. "Who is that woman?" she asks, leaning across the table. David hesitates, stuttering before responding. "Oh, nobody important." But his tone betrays that something is very wrong. Let's rewind a few years. Rachel wasn't just David's wife. She was a brilliant businesswoman, every bit as successful as he was. Together, they were the perfect couple in the eyes of the world. But behind closed doors, there was a silent power struggle. David couldn't stand the idea that Rachel might surpass him. He began sabotaging her, spreading rumors, and manipulating contracts to ruin her reputation. Rachel lost clients, partners, and eventually her company. She begged for explanations, but David only watched her coldly, as if it were all part of some grand plan. Back in the present, Rachel serves a table near David and Sophia. She overhears fragments of their conversation, especially when Sophia mentions something about a future together. Rachel lets out a discreet sigh, but her eyes gleam with determination. She's not the same woman David once knew. Now, she has something much bigger to fight for, the baby growing inside her. Meanwhile, David begins to wonder who the father of the child is. Did Rachel find someone new? Or could it be? He shakes his head, trying to push the thoughts away. But one thing is certain. This night will change everything. Forever. The night progresses, and the restaurant is steeped in tense silence for David. While Sophia tries to make conversation, he can barely conceal his agitation. His eyes keep drifting back to Rachel, who moves between the tables with an almost infuriating calm. He knows something is wrong, very wrong. And that child, who's the father? The question pounds in his head like an endless drum. Sophia notices David's distraction and presses him. "You know her, don't you?" He hesitates for a moment, but eventually stammers, She's just someone from the past." Sophia frowns, suspicious. "Seems like this someone still gets to you," she replies, her tone sharper than intended. David forces a smile, but his thoughts are far away, trapped in memories he'd rather forget. Rachel, on the other hand, keeps her composure. She serves the dishes with precision, but her mind is racing. Every time she passes David's table, she feels the weight of his gaze on her. She knows he's confused, maybe even scared. But Rachel isn't afraid anymore. Not after everything he did to her. The fall was painful, but it also taught her how to rebuild her life piece by piece. Meanwhile, Sophia decides to investigate. She watches Rachel closely, noticing details that David seems to overlook. The way Rachel carries the tray, the gleam in her eyes, even surrounded by luxury that clearly doesn't belong to her. There's something about her that stands out, something beyond appearances or pregnancy. Sophia senses there's a story there, a story David is hiding. Later, when David goes to the restroom, Sophia takes the opportunity to wander around the restaurant. She finds Rachel in a discreet corner, adjusting the silverware on an empty table. Carefully, she approaches and says, "You know David, right?" Rachel looks up, surprised, but quickly regains her composure. "Knew him," she responds with a coldness that surprises Sophia. "What happened between you two?" Sophia presses, curious. Rachel hesitates for a moment, but then lets out. "He took everything from me. My career, my life, everything." The words come out like sharp knives, full of pain and resentment. Sophia falls silent, absorbing the impact of Rachel's words. She realizes there's more to this story than David has admitted. When he returns to the table, Sophia is quiet, but her gaze is different. She begins to question who the man beside her really is. Meanwhile, Rachel continues working, but she carries a secret that could change everything. The child she's carrying isn't David's. It's Michael's, David's younger brother. A brief relationship between them occurred shortly after the divorce, when Rachel was vulnerable and Michael, always in love with her, tried to comfort her. Now, that secret looms over her like a shadow, threatening to come to light at any moment. David, oblivious to all of this, starts to feel like he's losing control. He's always been the man who called the shots, but now, for the first time, he feels the game slipping out of his hands. The night advances, and the restaurant begins to empty. The soft candlelight dances over the now deserted tables, but inside David, a storm is about to explode. He can't take his eyes off Rachel, who continues working as if nothing is happening. But something is different about her, something he can't quite figure out. And that child, who's the father? The question echoes in his mind like a distant thunderclap. As Sophia watches from afar, David decides to take action. He waits until Rachel passes by the table again, and with a forced casual tone, says, "We need to talk." She stops for a moment, surprised, but quickly responds, "There's nothing to talk about." Her voice is firm, almost cutting. David insists, "Rachel, I know you're hurt, but this," he gestures vaguely toward her stomach, "is important. I need to know what's going on." Rachel stares at him for a moment, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "You really think this has anything to do with you anymore?" she replies before quickly walking away. Sophia, who had been observing the scene from a distance, senses there's more behind those words. She begins to realize that David isn't the man she thought she knew. When they finally leave the restaurant, Sophia decides to confront him. "What was that back there?" "Who is she, David?" He hesitates, clearly uncomfortable. "I already told you, she's just someone from my past," he answers, avoiding Sophia's gaze. But she isn't convinced. "No, David, something's wrong here. You're hiding something from me." Meanwhile, Rachel returns home exhausted but determined. She enters her small apartment, where old photos are scattered around the living room. One catches her attention, a picture of her alongside Michael, David's younger brother. They're smiling, happy in a moment that seems to belong to another life. Rachel sighs, remembering the brief relationship they had after the divorce. It was intense but filled with guilt and pain. Michael had always loved her, even when she was emotionally fragile. Now, that love has resulted in a new life, a child growing inside her. On the other hand, Michael is in his office, surrounded by papers and documents. He's the opposite of David, sensitive, kind, and always willing to help others. But lately, he's been distracted, lost in thought. He knows Rachel is pregnant, and he carries the guilt of having gotten involved with her during such a delicate time. He tries to convince himself that he did what he thought was right, but David's shadow looms over him. His older brother would never accept it, never understand. The next day, David decides to dig deeper. He goes to Rachel's house unannounced. When she opens the door, she's surprised to see him there. "What are you doing here?" she asks, her tone defensive. David walks in without asking permission, looking around the modest apartment. "I need to know who the father of this child is," he says directly. Rachel stares at him, incredulous. "That's none of your business," she replies firmly. David insists, "Of course it is. If this child is mine, I have the right to know." Rachel lets out a bitter laugh. "You really think I'd let you be part of this child's life? After everything you've done?" David falls silent for a moment, then explodes. "You can't exclude me like this. I have rights." Rachel cuts him off. "You lost any rights the moment you destroyed my life." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. David storms out, furious, but inside, a seed of doubt begins to grow. Meanwhile, Michael decides to visit Rachel. He shows up at her door with a shy smile, carrying shopping bags. "I brought you some things," he says gently. Rachel greets him with a tight hug, grateful for his presence. They talk for hours, sharing fears and hopes for the future. Michael promises to stand by her side, no matter what happens. But while this unfolds, David starts to suspect something. He notices a connection between Rachel and Michael, something he hadn't noticed before. And that suspicion begins to eat away at his certainty, little by little. The next morning arrives, and the air feels heavier for David. He wakes up with the sensation that something is slipping through his fingers, something he can't fully identify. Rachel is pregnant, and that child, the mere thought that it might not be his, begins to gnaw at his mind like a slow poison. He has always been the man in control, but now, for the first time, he feels as though he's being swallowed by a whirlpool of uncertainties. Sophia watches David from a distance, noticing how different he seems. He barely touches his breakfast, lost in thought. She tries to strike up a conversation, but he responds with monosyllables, clearly distracted. Finally, Sophia decides to press him. "David, what's going on? You've been acting strange since yesterday." He hesitates for a moment, then mutters, "It's Rachel. I think she's hiding something." Sophia frowns, suspicious. "Did she mention someone? Someone important?" David shakes his head, irritated. "I don't know, but there's something wrong with this whole situation." Meanwhile, Rachel is in her apartment trying to keep calm. She knows David won't give up easily, and it worries her. Michael arrives later, bringing with him a sense of tranquility. "You need to prepare yourself," he says, his tone serious. David isn't going to stop until he uncovers the truth. Rachel sighs, exhausted. "I know, but there's nothing he can do. This child is mine, Michael. Mine and yours, not his." Michael takes her hands, trying to convey confidence. "I'm with you, Rachel, no matter what happens." But David has already started piecing things together. He remembers details he once ignored. The casual encounters between Rachel and Michael in the past, the exchanged glances during family gatherings. A suspicion grows within him, fueled by paranoia and jealousy. He decides to confront Michael directly. That same afternoon, David storms into Michael's office unannounced. Michael looks up, surprised, but quickly notices the furious expression on David's face. "What do you want?" he asks, trying to remain calm. David gets straight to the point. "You and Rachel. What's going on between you two?" Michael hesitates for a moment, then responds, "That's none of your business." David. The response only fuels David's anger. "What do you mean, It's none of my business. She's pregnant. Michael, what if that child is yours? Michael takes a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. Yes, the child is mine, he admits finally. David freezes for a moment, as if he's been punched in the gut. You betrayed the family for her, he shouts, incredulous. Michael meets his gaze firmly. I didn't betray anyone, David. I love Rachel, and she chose me. You lost the right to have an opinion about her life when you destroyed her. Michael's words hit David like a precise blow. He storms out of the office, furious but also confused. He has always seen Michael as the weaker brother, the more docile one. Now, for the first time, he realizes that perhaps he underestimated the youngest of the family. Meanwhile, Rachel receives an unexpected call. It's Sophia, who managed to get her number through contacts at the restaurant. I need to talk to you, Sophia says, her tone urgent. Rachel hesitates but agrees to meet her. They meet at a discreet cafe, where Sophia gets straight to the point. I know what David did to you, she says sincerely. Rachel falls silent for a moment, surprised. Why are you helping me? She asks, suspicious. Sophia smiles bitterly. Because I'm starting to understand who David really is. The conversation between the two creates an unexpected bond. Sophia promises to help Rachel face David, while Rachel shares more details about how David ruined her life. Together, they begin planning how to expose the magnate's misdeeds. But David isn't willing to lose. He starts investigating Rachel and Sophia's moves, determined to find something he can use against them. He knows he's in a battle and doesn't intend to come out defeated. However, the more he digs, the more secrets begin to surface. Secrets that could shake not only his life but also his fortune and reputation. The tension mounts, and every move seems to lead to an inevitable confrontation. The pieces are falling into place, but there's still much more to come. The truth has a curious way of surfacing, even when we try to bury it deep. For David, the weight of the secrets he helped create is about to collapse on him like a house of cards in the wind. He always thought he could control everything and everyone, but now he realizes that some things are beyond even the most powerful man's grasp. Sophia is determined to uncover more about David's dark past. She begins sifting through old documents, financial records, and contracts scattered around his office. Amid piles of papers, she finds something that makes her blood run cold. Clear evidence that David sabotaged Rachel years ago. So this is it, Sophia mutters, a mix of anger and sadness in her voice. He didn't just ruin her life. He made sure to erase any chance of recovery. The evidence is irrefutable, detailing how David manipulated deals, spread false rumors, and even forged signatures to destroy Rachel's career. Meanwhile, Rachel receives an anonymous letter the next day. Inside the plain envelope, there's only one handwritten sentence. David knows about the child. Be careful. A chill runs down her spine. The message is clear. David is moving, and quickly. She decides to call Michael, who arrives at her apartment within minutes. We need to act before he does something, Michael says, tense. Rachel agrees, but she also knows they need help. That's where Sophia comes in. The two women meet again, this time in an even more discreet location. Sophia hands Rachel the evidence she found, explaining every detail. You can use this against him, Sophia says firmly. Rachel hesitates for a moment, but then nods. I don't want revenge, she replies calmly. I just want justice. Sophia smiles, admiring Rachel's strength. Then let's make sure you get it. David, on the other hand, is growing desperate. He realizes the pieces are moving against him and decides to take drastic measures. He goes to Rachel again, this time offering money. "I can give you everything you need," he says, almost pleading. "Just tell me what you want to stay quiet about this child." Rachel stares at him, incredulous. "Do you really think you can buy my silence after everything you've done?" She shakes her head in disdain. "This child has nothing to do with you, David. Never did." Furious, David leaves the apartment determined to find another way to resolve the situation. He decides to confront Michael again, this time during a family dinner organized by their parents. The atmosphere is formal, filled with polite laughter and superficial conversations, but David can't hide his rage. During dessert, he explodes. "Do you think you can just steal my wife and get away with it?" Everyone at the table falls silent, shocked. Michael calmly stands up, facing his brother. "Rachel was never truly your wife, David. You treated her like a trophy, not a person. And now, I'm here to ensure she has the life she deserves." The fight between the brothers escalates quickly, with shouts echoing through the room. Their parents try to intervene, but it's too late. The truth about David's sabotage and Rachel and Michael's relationship comes out in front of the entire family. Some are horrified, others furious. But one thing is certain, David has nowhere left to hide. The next day, Sophia and Rachel begin planning their next move. They know they need to expose David publicly, but they also know it will be risky. "If we go through with this, there's no turning back," Rachel says, looking at Sophia. "Are you ready for this?" Sophia smiles, determination in her eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Meanwhile, David desperately tries to regain control of the situation. He calls lawyers, publicists, and even old allies, but he realizes many are already distancing themselves from him. His once unshakable empire begins to show cracks. He knows the next blow could be the final one. The tension is palpable, and every move seems to lead to an inevitable confrontation. The game is far from over, but the cards are being revealed one by one. The storm that had been brewing has finally arrived, and the consequences promise to be devastating. David has always been the eldest brother, the unquestionable leader of the family, but now he faces a threat he never imagined. His own blood, Michael, is willing to fight against him to protect Rachel and the future of her child. The family dinner ended in chaos, with shouts echoing through the walls and secrets being exposed without filter. Now, the next morning, the two brothers are face to face in David's office. The atmosphere is heavy, charged with tension. "Do you really think you can challenge me like this?" David asks, his tone icy. Michael doesn't back down. "I'm not challenging you, David. I'm doing what you've never done." Putting someone above your ego, the words hit David like a punch, but he maintains his rigid posture. "She was my wife, Michael. Mine." Michael shakes his head, incredulous. "You never saw her as a person, only as a possession. And when she stopped being useful, you threw her away." David walks to the window, trying to control his anger. He knows Michael is right about many things, but that only fuels his frustration. "You don't understand," he says, almost growling. "I did what had to be done. She was becoming too powerful, starting to question my decisions. I couldn't allow that." Michael looks at him, shocked. "So that's it? You ruined her life because you were afraid of losing control?" David doesn't respond, but his silence speaks volumes. Meanwhile, Rachel is determined to move forward. She receives a call from Sophia, who shares new documents found in David's files. They are even more damning evidence of his manipulations and business frauds. "This will bring him down," Sophia says firmly. Rachel hesitates for a moment, thinking about the consequences. "I don't want to destroy anyone, Sophia. I just want justice." Sophia smiles, understanding. "Sometimes Justice means exposing the truth, even if it hurts. The battle between the brothers continues to escalate. David decides to take drastic measures. He calls an emergency meeting with his lawyers and advisors, determined to find a way to silence Rachel and Michael. But to his surprise, many of his allies begin to distance themselves. Some mention rumors about his past behavior. Others simply don't want to get involved in a public scandal. David realizes he's losing support rapidly. Michael, on the other hand, is gaining strength. He begins gathering former colleagues of Rachel's, people who witnessed her downfall and know the role David played in it. Together, they prepare a public statement, ready to expose David's misdeeds to the world. "This is our chance to make sure he pays for what he's done," Michael says with determination. Rachel agrees, but also urges caution. "We need to do this right. We can't give him any room to escape." On the day set for the revelation of the evidence, David tries one last resort. He goes to Rachel again, this time pleading, "Please, Rachel, we can resolve this without a scandal," he says, almost desperate. Rachel looks at him, unmoved. "You had your chance, David. Now it's my turn." With those words, she closes the door in his face, leaving him alone in the hallway. Later, during an important corporate event organized by David, everything explodes. Rachel and Sophia appear unexpectedly, accompanied by Michael and several of Rachel's former colleagues. In front of journalists and influential businessmen, they present irrefutable evidence of David's frauds. The room falls silent, shocked. David tries to defend himself, but his words seem empty in the face of the avalanche of evidence. The press jumps into action, immediately spreading the news everywhere. Within hours, David's name is all over the headlines, associated with fraud and abuse of power. His empire begins to crumble piece by piece. Meanwhile, Rachel and Michael leave the event together, finally free from the weight of the past. Sophia watches from afar, feeling a mix of relief and pride. She knows she made the right choice in helping Rachel, but even with victory in sight, Rachel knows there's still much work ahead. Rebuilding her life won't be easy, but she's ready to face the future alongside Michael and her child. Still, the confrontation with David has left deep scars, and the next chapter of this story promises to be even more intense. The dust begins to settle after the public scandal, but the consequences of David's fall are far from being fully felt. Rachel and Michael leave the corporate event with a mix of relief and determination, knowing that the battle against David was only the first step in their journey to rebuild their lives. Meanwhile, Sophia finds herself at a personal turning point, torn between her feelings for David and the clear injustice she witnessed. Rachel decides it's time to take back control of her life. She starts looking for ways to rebuild her career, something she thought was lost forever. With the help of former colleagues who believe in her innocence, she secures a meeting with an influential businessman willing to give her a second chance. During the conversation, Rachel demonstrates all the passion and skill that have always defined her. The businessman is impressed and offers her a position at his company. "You have something special, Rachel," he says sincerely. The world needs to see that again. Rachel leaves the meeting with tears in her eyes, feeling that she's finally on the right path. Michael, on the other hand, remains by her side, as steadfast as ever. He knows Rachel still carries deep wounds, both emotional and financial, and makes sure to support her every step of the way. Together, they begin planning for the future, including the arrival of the baby. "This child will grow up in a home full of love," Michael says, holding Rachel's hands. She smiles, grateful to have him by her side. "I couldn't do this without you," she replies softly. Meanwhile, Sophia faces her own internal crisis. After helping Rachel expose David, she realizes she can no longer ignore who he truly is. She tries to confront him one last time. But David is different now, defeated, isolated, and bitter. He barely acknowledges Sophia when she enters his office. "Did you really think I'd give up everything?" he asks with a cold laugh. Sophia shakes her head, sad. "It's not about giving up, David. It's about accepting the consequences of your choices." Her words echo in the empty room, but David doesn't seem to hear. He's trapped in his own anger, unable to see beyond himself. Sophia decides to move forward. She officially ends things with David, determined to build a life away from his toxic shadow. But before leaving, she does one last thing. She delivers additional documents to the press proving even more of David's crimes. "This isn't for me," she tells Rachel during a phone call. "It's for everyone he hurt." Rachel thanks her, moved. "You did the right thing, Sophia. Never forget that." David's situation only worsens. Without money, without reputation, and without support, he finds himself alone for the first time in years. He tries to regain control of his life, but everything seems to slip through his fingers. His lawyers abandon him, his friends disappear, and even his family begins to question his actions. In a moment of desperation, he decides to visit Rachel again, this time with an unexpected request. "Help me fix this," he pleads, tears in his eyes. Rachel stares at him, surprised. "Why would I do that? After everything you've done to me?" David lowers his head, defeated. "Because I don't know what else to do." Rachel hesitates, but then makes a surprising decision. She won't help David directly, but she offers him unexpected advice. "If you really want to change, start by admitting your mistakes. Not to me, but to yourself." David falls silent for a moment, absorbing her words. He leaves the apartment without saying anything more, but something inside him seems to have shifted. Meanwhile, Rachel and Michael continue building their life together. They receive support from Sophia, who decides to grow closer to Rachel. The two women form an unexpected friendship based on trust and mutual respect. "We did it," Sophia says during a casual coffee meetup. "But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Rachel agrees, smiling. "Yes, it's the start of something new." But while Rachel and Michael celebrate their victories, David remains lost in his own thoughts. He knows the road ahead will be difficult, but he also understands that it might be his only chance for redemption. Still, the weight of his mistakes continues to haunt him, and he realizes that some wounds may never fully heal. The story is far from over. New challenges loom on the horizon, promising to test the strength and courage of everyone involved even further. David's fall was spectacular, but Rachel knows that exposing the truth isn't enough. She wants more, not for revenge, but for justice. As Michael and Sophia unite to help her, a bold plan begins to take shape. After all, as they say, those who don't rise after a storm will never be strong enough to face another. Rachel is determined. She knows David still has hidden resources, fortunes stashed in secret accounts that he'll use to rebuild himself once the dust settles. He'll try to come back, she tells Michael during a conversation on the couch in her apartment. "We need to make sure he has nowhere to go." Michael agrees, but warns this could be dangerous. He won't accept it without a fight. Rachel smiles, resolute. "Then we'll make sure he has no choice." Sophia steps in again, bringing new information about David's financial operations. She discovered that he maintains several shell companies scattered around the world, used for money laundering. "If we can prove this," Sophia says, "he'll be finished forever." Rachel and Michael exchange glances, knowing this is the chance they've been waiting for. The trio begins working in secret. They gather documents, trace transactions, and even secure testimonies from former business partners of David's who now fear being associated with him. These guys will talk, Sophia says confidently. They know David isn't worth the risk anymore. Rachel nods, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. We just need to act fast. Meanwhile, David tries to pick himself up. He sells assets, cuts expenses, and desperately seeks allies. But to his frustration, no one seems willing to help him. Even his most loyal lawyers start demanding upfront fees. "You've abandoned me," he yells during a tense phone call. On the other end of the line, the silence is deafening. David hangs up, furious, realizing he's alone. But he doesn't give up. Determined to regain control, David decides to confront Rachel one more time. He shows up at her door late at night with an almost pleading expression. "I know you want to see me at rock bottom," he says, his voice trembling. "But I can change, Rachel. Give me a chance." Rachel stares at him, unmoved. "You had your chance, David. It's too late now." He tries to argue, but she closes the door in his face, leaving him standing in the dark hallway. The next day, Rachel, Michael, and Sophia finalize preparations for the final blow. They call a press conference, inviting influential journalists and regulatory bodies. During the event, they present all the evidence of David's illegal operations, including detailed documents and incriminating recordings. The room erupts in murmurs as reporters absorb the magnitude of the scandal. David watches everything on TV, incredulous. He tries to call his lawyers, but no one answers. His hands tremble as he realizes he's cornered. "No, this can't be happening," he mutters, tears in his eyes. The fallout is immediate. Authorities launch a full investigation into David, freezing his accounts and seizing his assets. He becomes a social pariah, avoided by everyone. Meanwhile, Rachel and Michael celebrate discreetly. "We did what needed to be done," Michael says, hugging Rachel. She smiles but reflects, "I hope he learns something from this." Sophia, on the other hand, decides to move forward with her life. She starts working on her own projects, far from David's shadow. "I've finally freed myself," she tells Rachel during a coffee meetup. "And you helped me do that." Rachel returns the smile, grateful to have found a true friend. But the story still holds twists. David, now humiliated and isolated, begins to reflect on his choices. He realizes that his thirst for power cost him everything he valued most: respect, love, and purpose. Maybe it's time to start over, he thinks, alone in his small apartment. Still, Rachel knows the future won't be easy. Rebuilding her life and raising her child will require strength and patience. But with Michael and Sophia by her side, she feels she can face anything. The next chapter of this journey promises to be filled with new challenges and perhaps even redemption for some. The fall of David Thompson is inevitable, but the impact of his downfall goes beyond his fortune. It's the story of a man who built his empire on lies and now watches it all crumble around him. As Rachel and Michael move forward, he faces the consequences of years of selfish choices. The investigations against David progress rapidly. Authorities uncover more irregularities in his financial operations, including tax fraud and money laundering. Journalists publish daily reports exposing every sordid detail of his crimes. The image he meticulously built over the years is in shambles. He tries to defend himself, appearing in interviews to deny the accusations, but his words ring hollow. The public has already decided David is no longer a respected magnate, but a criminal. Meanwhile, Rachel is busy rebuilding her life. She starts working at the new company that offered her a position, showcasing all the skill and dedication that have always defined her. Her colleagues quickly recognize the value she brings to the team. "You have something special, Rachel," her new boss says during a meeting. "We're glad to have you with us." She smiles, finally feeling valued. Michael remains by her side, as steadfast as ever. He knows Rachel still carries emotional scars, but also sees her strength grow each day. Together, they prepare the baby's room, painting the walls in soft tones and assembling the crib. "This child will grow up knowing how loved she is," Michael says while adjusting a shelf. Rachel agrees, tears in her eyes. "She'll never go through what I went through." Sophia, on the other hand, finds her own path. She decides to invest in a personal project, opening a small consultancy to help women who are victims of abuse in the corporate world. "I know what it's like to be deceived and manipulated," she tells Rachel during a casual meeting. "I want to do something to change that." Rachel is moved by the initiative. "You're doing something incredible, Sophia. I'm proud of you." David, isolated and without resources, tries to find ways to escape the accusations. He sells everything he can, from luxury cars to jewelry, but the money barely covers the fines and compensations that begin to pile up. His once immaculate apartment is now empty, with furniture covered in white sheets. He spends hours sitting in silence, reflecting on how he got here. "I had everything, and I threw it all away," he mutters to himself. In a moment of desperation, David decides to visit Rachel one last time. He shows up at her door with a humble expression, something she's never seen before. "I just wanted to apologize," he says, his voice breaking. "I know I made mistakes, big ones, but I hope that one day you can forgive me." Rachel stares at him for a long moment, surprised by the sincerity in his words. "I don't know if I can forgive you, David," she responds calmly, "but maybe it's time for you to start forgiving yourself." David leaves with a strange feeling, something between relief and pain. He knows the road ahead will be difficult, but he also understands that he needs to change. He begins looking for simple jobs, willing to rebuild his life from scratch. It won't be easy, but he realizes this might be his only chance at redemption. Meanwhile, Rachel and Michael continue building a future together. They celebrate small victories, like Rachel's first paycheck in her new position and the imminent arrival of their baby. "We're on the right path," Michael says, holding her hands. Rachel smiles, feeling lighter than ever. "Yes, we are." But the story still holds surprises. David, now humble and determined to change, begins attending support groups for people who have lost everything. There, he meets others who have faced similar falls and learns valuable lessons about resilience and forgiveness. "Maybe there's still hope for me," he thinks for the first time in years. The next chapter promises new challenges and perhaps even a chance for healing for those who need it most. After months of struggle, Rachel gives birth to a healthy baby girl, bringing renewed joy to her life. She and Michael welcome the baby with unconditional love, determined to build a family based on true values. Meanwhile, David continues his journey of redemption, seeking to rebuild his life away from the spotlight. Rachel and Michael celebrate the arrival of little Emily, named in honor of Rachel's mother. They decorate the nursery with family photos and meaningful mementos. "This child will grow up surrounded by love," Michael says as he holds Emily in his arms. Rachel smiles, feeling complete for the first time in years. Sophia visits the couple regularly, bringing gifts and stories about her new project. "I'm helping so many women, Rachel," she says during a sunny afternoon. "It gives me purpose." Rachel hugs her, grateful for the unexpected friendship. "You're changing the world, Sophia. Never forget that." David, on the other hand, finds work as a junior consultant at a small firm. He learns to be humble, accepting criticism and striving to improve each day. Maybe I can still do some good, he thinks while helping a colleague with a challenging project. The story ends with a reflection. Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't in money or power, but in the connections we create and the positive impact we leave on the world. Rachel, Michael, Sophia, and even David are learning this, each in their own way.